Yes, seems like it's working.
Are you good?
Yep.
All right. Okay. Thanks for having me on this lunch event and to present some of my thoughts about where managed detection and response is going. This presentation is based on the first of a three-part series, a blog series that I'm writing on the topic, together with a partner of mine in Amin Besson from Behemoth Security. So give some acknowledgement to him as well. So keeping in mind, this is the first part of a three-part series. I am diving into more of the where is managed MDR or managed detection response as an industry now, and I'll also, given the context of the presentation, dive a little bit into kind of where I subjectively think it's going as well. Right. Let's see if I can remove this so you don't see this on my screen. Okay. Short introduction, don't have to spend much time on that, but I do work in Wanik. I do now work primarily with strategy for managed detection and response. Spent last 2-3 years working specifically with building out our cloud services. Prior to that, worked in VIPs where I built out security, incident response, etc. But been in this space for more or less, I think it's 11 years now, 10, 11 years. So what are we talking about today? This is the agenda. In terms, I'll be starting a little bit talking about the state of play. Where are we today? A little bit around positioning, as I mentioned, diving a little bit about the key areas of MDR, which is monitoring, detection, analysis, response, that type of stuff, and kind of how to kind of address that going in the future. If there are, I guess we can take questions at the very end as well. So let's get started. What is managed detection and response? It is, as the slide says, very loosely defined at best. If you try to go around and shop these type of services, one thing you will understand rather quickly is that this is delivered very differently across vendors, across geographical borders. An MDR type of service can look very differently in Norway or in the Nordics than it can, say, in the US. But in a very lightweight manner, I guess you can say it's a form of outsourcing of the capabilities to kind of detect and respond to a threat on behalf of yourself to a vendor of some sorts. And there is some history around kind of how do we get to building out these services. I guess 10, 15 years ago, these type of services were called managed SOC services, and they were kind of at that time built to handle a large flow of data of alerts without necessarily going into the actual response. And the industry, or I guess the customers, understood that they wanted more, hence putting the response in the name of this type of service. So it kind of evolved to manage detection and response, which is also a clue for this type of service. That even though this is it's a disclaimer, I guess, as well, I'll have a lot of subjective takes in this presentation. But even though the industry evolved or adapted or embraced the name managed detection and response, I also strongly believe that most services haven't really had a grasp or firm grasp on doing response on behalf of their customers when delivering this type of service. In terms of kind of, again, talking a little bit about history in terms of how this kind of evolved technologically as well, you can also use this perspective not only for MDR as an industry, but also for companies, for organizations building out their SOC services. Technologically, back in the 90s, I guess, early 2000s, it was mostly based on IDS systems, or intrusion detection systems, which were based on the networking capabilities. Moved over to SIM solutions, which was kind of prevalent in the early 2000s. Have some background chatter. If anyone can mute that. Yeah, thank you. Yes, moving on from SIM, you see a lot of you see over there was an EDR kind of revolution, I guess early 2010s, a little bit before that, where that kind of became like the prevalent way of not only building out SOC services, but like building out. You would see vendors building out their whole MDR type of service based on a service on top of an endpoint solution alone. Safe to say that wasn't kind of all fulfilling. After that came XDR, where you would see these type of platforms. Now we'll talk a lot about platforms today. How you would have all of the, I guess, above technologies and EDR, networking-based solutions, SIEM type of solutions, and more in terms of automation into one single type of platform, which has been, I guess, a category that has matured a lot since its introduction back in 2015, 16, 17. It's going to be safe to say, let's see if I can also remove, there you go. It's going to be safe to say as well that it's interesting to go to see kind of how AI is going to impact industry going into the future, and I'll be talking a little bit about that as well today. But it's also important. It's going to be very important for MDR vendors to not be blind to kind of the movement that's happening around us in AI, because it is a huge movement and potentially a huge shift in how vendors need to provide these type of managed detection response services with that type of service coming into the market. In terms of this is to kind of read this out. I talked a little bit about some type of history in terms of technology. One thing I typically like to say is that MDR providers, I guess all the way from early 2000s up until now, they have thrived in untangling technological complexity on behalf of customers. Because over time, it has been significantly difficult to position yourself as an organization to be able to detect threats that are relevant to you. There's a whole lot of technologies that needs to be in place, specific technologies, a whole lot of competencies that needs to be implemented on top of them, and that's kind of where these plug-and-play services came into play, where a lot of customers would outsource this whole ecosystem in terms of what type of firewall should I get? What type of log management system should I get? What type of network intrusion detection system should I get? Like, how do I provide detection capabilities on top of this product at scale? That's the gist of what MDR providers have done over time, done well. There is a shift in kind of how the industry is moving based on a lot of different things. But also typically, before kind of going into that, I typically generalize the historic value proposal of MDR into two things. Not from a technological space, but more from the value you get in terms of processes, stuff like that. The first is, I guess I can talk about the funnel first. If you've been to a presentation of an MDR provider, I'm sure you've seen a funnel. And this is kind of something in my perspective that a perspective needs to kind of change in terms of what's important. Where there's billion signals, million events, thousands of alerts. Again, and at the very end there is some form of high fidelity signals. And the two parts I typically talk about when I say like what is the historic value of MDR is one is kind of taking in a lot of data from a customer, and with technology, with competency, providing an understanding or standing thinking that something here has gone wrong. We have seen that there's a behavior that we don't like. That is basically detections, and they provide a lot of them. After having a lot of detections, they will try to do some type of filtering primarily. This is kind of a legacy approach to this as well, primarily using human capital to understand if those type of detections, those signals are relevant for the customers as well, so that the customer themselves end up with only high fidelity signals. And this is kind of this has worked over time. But given that the industry have changed, customers have changed, technology have changed, this kind of there's been like a change in the actual output, and that is if you look at customers, I think customers in 2015 were maybe they were left with say 5 alerts at the very end, but when I look at the industry, I see that that's not really the case anymore. I'll get back to why, but just bear with me at this time. But what we do see that given the landscape out there, most customers after going through this funnel, they're still feeling all overwhelmed. They're still getting a high number of reports. The alerts that they do get still require themselves in order to validate that the alert is actually a true positive, is actually something that they need to address, and they most often need to do the actual response itself, which kind of goes back to my initial slide in terms of what is MDR. It is subjective, but many customers, especially in today's ecosystem, expect that mitigation is going to happen. And that is something that needs to be addressed. So, what is disrupting MDR? I've said it a couple of times already, but I strongly believe that MDR customers have a shift expectation, and that is because of multiple factors. I haven't dived into all of them, but these are some of the main ones. The first thing is trivial access to capabilities. I also mentioned earlier that some of the most important capabilities or values that MDR providers provide over time was untangling technological complexity. And what we do see now is that customers themselves, they don't come to MDR providers having no technology investments already made. They will have access to mature detection and response platforms when they come to an MDR provider. That is a significant shift in the kind of in terms of what the order is to the MDR provider, because they have access to or trivial. I'm going to emphasize emphasize the word trivial access to capabilities. They have learned to kind of work with the tools. They have increased their own maturity with that access, and they also having that type of platforms on their side and not having that platform being delivered as a type of black box service. Customer expects transparent deliverables as well. It's very hard for an MDR provider to say to kind of come with some type of a black box service when a customer is accustomed to having mature detection response capabilities in-house. And this is kind of also where we see the outcry for partnerships, because they have already made investments into platforms, into mature detection response tooling. And that's kind of where they see the MDR providers. They want them to come in actually as a part of their service, not only be capable of detecting, responding to threats, but also improving their own technology that they use in the posture of those products. And that represents a significant shift in the delivery model for MDR providers and what they're supposed to focus on. So I can spend a lot of time talking about the technology landscapes, but I'll dive a little bit into it, but can't go too far down. But in terms of the technology that customers have access to, I typically see two parts or two versions. One is kind of the platform-centric approach, where that has been gaining a lot of traction the last couple of years, more or so, I guess. Which is there's always been platforms, but there's not always been platforms that we have today, and a large part of that is a large part of why platforms for customers are so effective today is cloud. There's a lot of like homogeneous environments where the platforms that the vendors are able to create, Defender XDR as an example, they are super efficient as a result of cloud and the environments being homogeneous, and that they can enable capabilities on behalf of customers in a super efficient way. The other approach is kind of the best of breed, which is the industry has seen of a long time. If you're very much into the space as well, you might have seen some chatter about a decoupled approach. Which means basically that you kind of go the whole opposite way of platforms of having all the different capabilities in the platform, and having specific services for data storage, specific layers for analysis, for detection, for AI, for response. That adds a lot of complexity, and we do see that. That type of approach is mostly reserved to type MDR service providers and the customer that has the most access to both competency and capabilities. And sometimes we see a hybrid or combination of both. I guess this is kind of, I guess I talked a little bit about this, but like the example, I'll use Microsoft as an example here. And this is a slide I really love showing. It's a very busy slide. But when I started to work with Microsoft Security back in 2017, 2018, especially Azure Cloud, there's one thing on there, none of this existed. You had Azure Security Center. And fast forward to now, 2025, to kind of make the point I'm trying to make is that customers themselves have trivial access to a whole bunch of mature detection and response capabilities. And what all of these products do on behalf of customers is generate insight or based on the data that they have access to, and process it and create high fidelity signals. And going back to what I said was kind of one of the main value proposal of MDR, overlaps, just to be very blunt about it. And not only like does that overlap, but it is a significant productivity boost for the whole industry. If you look at how one is able to kind of achieve these type of capabilities at the speed that you're able to do so. Back in 2000, let's use 2017 again. If you were, let's say, SIM based, where you would have to set up a type of SIM tool such as Splunk, which was kind of one of the most prevalent vendors at the time, you would typically spend months to years to get to the same type of capability that you will spend days with a platform stack. Because you would have to go out, understand what type of data do you want, how do I ingest this to the service, how do I normalize data, how do I accelerate the data, how do I then enable my detection engineering capabilities on top of these platforms, only to kind of at that point have very generic threat detection capabilities. But fast forward to now, you'll buy an E5 license, you'll integrate some data in Sentinel, and that takes at most a couple of days to get to the same generic state. And that's kind of where I kind of look at this. And my point is that with all these products, Defender XDR, Sentinel, Defender for Cloud, Purview or Insider Risk Management isn't even mentioned there. Customers have trivial access to capabilities. And given what I said earlier about what the kind of the primary value proposal of call it traditional MDR has been, it's kind of been the same. And what's kind of funny for me is that you're left in a position where kind of, as I see it, you'll see products, vendor platforms, MDR vendors are all generating a massive alert. The same type of analysts and responders, or the analysts and responders that we have in the field, they're stuck looking at these type of alerts, because one of the kind of key assumptions here as well is that the alerts are not handled to a large enough extent. And the question I'm kind of asking myself, like, if everyone is generating these alerts, who is the one who actually responds? And this is fine. It's really not. And I'm very passionate about this, and that is that it might be obvious, but my take on that it hasn't really been. Uh, the industry has kind of coined this type of service as managed detection and response, and that is kind of the gist that they has to shift more over to response for this kind of ecosystem, this type of situation, for this to be for this to change, because with trivial access to with when customers have trivial access to these capabilities, they're bound to start thinking. I feel like this is very, at least in my perspective, a powerful statement that I had in the blog post that I wrote as well, and that is with these type of, just to summarize it, like with the type of access you customers have to technology today, these type of specific mature technologies, I think a lot of customers or and SOC leaders specifically are asking themselves, like, what is the NDR doing that specifically can't be done with a small number of internal detection and response engineers? If MDR doesn't start to kind of shift its value proposal to something that doesn't really kind of overlap with what the vendors are kind of diving into providing for their customers. And this is kind of where my subjective take again is that the industry players that learn how to kind of scale the latter parts of the instant response cycle, for you guys that are familiar with that, while also specializing in not generic type of detections, but customer specific one, is the ones that are kind of that are going to be I guess to use the word at the slide, emerge as the next generation MDR. I strongly believe that. And it kind of starts with addressing, I call it the alert forwarder problem, because when you, as I mentioned again, when the whole ecosystem has changed, where the primary generators of the generic alerts are provided by platforms outside of the MDR vendor, that kind of shifts the perspective of customers of what they kind of want the MDR vendor to focus on. And I've seen this shift happen, I guess, over many years now, where there's a shift from being happy with being given the capability of detecting or being able to detect threats, to now saying, hey, I have a lot of alerts, but I want you to respond to them. Uh, and not only respond in terms of saying, like, hey, there is something bad happening in your environment, but hey, I do see that this man-in-the-middle attack is happening. I want you to go in and kind of revoke that user session. I want you to block that user from logging in. I want you to go in and I want you to look at let's say what the intrusion factor was. If it was a phishing email, I want you to go in and look at did other employees in my organization get the same phishing email? Please go and quarantine that email. That is a whole different ecosystem, whole different play when it comes to scale. Um, and this is, if some of you have listened in on some of my presentations before, I've shown this slide before. I think it's very important in terms of messaging. And that is kind of to kind of visualize how I think like this kind of shift needs to happen from the traditional type of focus that was largely revolved around detecting and having basic triage of alerts. This is something that the industry have learn to scale. And economies of scale is super important for managed detection and response vendors. But going forward, and based on what I've said up until now, what I do see in the market, what customers are typically asking for and wanting is vendors that are able to go more or less go all the way for their customers, and which is a natural development for MDR providers to have a seat at the table next to the vendors themselves making the investments that they're investment. But this is very hard to do. So I'm not saying that, and that is kind of a point I'm trying to make, is that not, even though it's hard to do, it's, in my personal opinion, it's not impossible to do. And this is kind of, I'm not going to today to I'm not going to go dive too much into kind of all of the hows for this today, because that will require more than 45 minutes. But in terms of to kind of go a little bit into it, if you look at these type of platforms and how they've worked, typically or I guess sometimes they've used perspective where an analyst, a human specifically, have been getting a lot of events. That is kind of a process, but events from products where they've used human capital to kind of put a lot of events together and trying to basically correlate what is relevant signals next to each other, and they've created insight out of it and created summary and handed that over to the customer. And that doesn't really fly if you want to scale the latter parts of the attack cycle. It's very important that that the platform or the technology that the MDR provider uses enables analysts to start at the analysis stage. And this is a significant step up, and you can also make the call, or say that this is kind of what the platforms are doing as well today, which kind of also further enforces the point I'm making in terms of overlapping value proposals, and again, being able to figure out how to do more or use less capital or less human capital to do both instant analysis, response, and creating instant reports on behalf of customers is going to be crucial going forward. So this is kind of a dicey one in terms of MDR platforms. MDR is drowning in data. Where is the platform? And typically, what I mean by that, I guess, is that when you build an MDR platform, or I guess a SOC platform, you typically want to do these type of steps I've shown in these type of arrows here. You want to collect, normalize, optimize, enrich, query, and present some data. Over time, you'll use the typical approach has been to centralize data, centralize raw data. And this has been kind of the optimized approach for security operations, but not necessarily for industry requirements as they have evolved. Customers today are primarily in cloud. We see most, if not all, have some type of footprint in cloud, where there's cost related to moving data. Customers are investing into not necessarily just one cloud platform, but many, and not just to talk about cloud platform, but also different security platforms. So you're seeing a whole bunch of vendors, if it's infrastructure vendors, cloud vendors, or a mix of them, all positioning themselves to be the decentralized platform. And that's kind of very difficult if you are trying to provide MDR or monitoring, detection, response services on top of this type of ecosystem. To kind of come into a customer and say like, hey, but we need to also centralize at a third place, it doesn't really fly in terms of cost efficiency, and it doesn't really hit the things I talked about earlier about what customers really want from MDR price in terms of transparency, in terms of partnerships, stuff like that. And that kind of changes the ecosystem in terms, at least in my perspective, that it moves over to a more distributed approach, where you have to push value and push information on demand rather than taking all the data into your own platform to perform these type of steps. this is kind of, I guess, very simplified, super simplified take on kind of how it looked like before in terms of sending data in, and you would get alerts back. But what I'm subjectively seeing is kind of the new model, which is also a model that hasn't thoroughly been solved yet as well, is as a MDR provider being able to provide the values that you provide in terms of detection engineering capabilities, response capabilities, analyst capabilities to the platform specifically, and also enable those platforms to best understand the data they get from this cloud service providers, different SaaS apps, SaaS applications or applications directly. And this is a very interesting and a difficult, task at hand for the industry to be able to deliver on this type of deliverable. I can skip this given time. So talked a little bit about platforms. I want to also spend a little bit of time talking about the detection engineering, because I've spent a little bit of time talking about that. I think it's super important going forward that MDR vendors start focusing not on necessarily detecting generic threats and handling the generic stuff, but being able to move over to the more specific contextual things for customers. And to be able to do that, I think vendors need to start focusing on capabilities that gives low-level insights. And that is because I mentioned this before with the distributed design. Detection engineering and the output of it needs to be given needs to be distributed out to customers in an ecosystem where you're not alone in delivering detections. And when you're not alone, in order to kind of not overlap, it will require it's going to require low-level insight on who does what. So on the right hand side here, I have super simplified visualization of detection coverage. And I am very much aware that this is a bad way of showing detection coverage, but just bear with me for the simplicity of it. So horizontally, you have attack surface, and vertically, you have both coverage and capabilities. And my take is that the products themselves, that was a bit hard to see, but what I've written there is security products. MDR vendors need to understand that products themselves, that the customers kind of come with initially when addressing MDR vendors and evaluating them, is understanding that the products that they have, they to a large extent do already cover the opportunistic part of kind of the coverage assessment. And that's very important to understand. So kind of the package or the value you as a vendor are trying to give from detection engineering can't really be about the generic threats, because that is going to overlap. And to be able to understand what that type of coverage is, that requires in-depth understanding of what does Defender XDR, Defender for Cloud. If a customer has these type of data sources in Sentinel, what type of coverage does that give them, and how do I go forward in terms of understanding what the gaps are? Also, like what also with trivial access, as I mentioned earlier, to capabilities. This is something I've started to see a lot more as well prior to before, is that most customers have some form of capabilities of building out their own detections, and they want to. Which also, and that is a good thing as well, in terms of what customers themselves are only are when they are the only ones positioned to kind of handle some type of business type of logic, application logic that only them knows. And that kind of means that kind of shifts the focus from MDR vendors to kind of, again, fill the gaps primarily, which is you can say a lot smaller type of deliverable, but a harder one to deliver on. This is kind of where I typically also say that when you see a vendor boast about having thousands and thousands and thousands of detection rules, I'm not that impressed by that. I want to hear about the ones that have 100 detection rules for that specific customers that they know are relevant to them and that they know work. That is, in my perspective, a better approach to it. Because customers themselves, they're asking about things such as, to be very about time, they're asking about things such as like they're like, hey, what is my overall coverage assessment? Which data should I acquire into my platform first to give what type of detection value? If a customer has multiple platforms, say they have Defender XDR and they have Google Command Center, and they might have Splunk from that they have for their on-premise stuff, they need to know like where is it best to send the data or where is it best to deploy detection based on the capabilities I need either for compliance or to do threat hunting or to do actual detection and perform actual detections. And this is kind of without having, as I said, fine-grained insight, you're not going to be able to do this in a meaningful way. I've seen a lot of vendors trying to kind of answer this question, putting a finger up in the air and doing this like as best effort. Everyone understand that Entra ID is important, that Microsoft 365 is important to monitor, but why and where is and actually be able to understand it from a threat perspective is kind of a key differentiator. And this kind of this is something that I've been working on as well, and can't go too much into that now. But I think, like as I mentioned on a slide before, taking inspiration from the data engineering as a field is crucial. Because it's exactly what that is. And I see a lot of security platforms, a lot of security products that are having great success with graph-based approach over tabular-based approaches to kind of getting insight. And that is something I also think detection engineers and MDR providers need to draw inspiration from, so that you have a database, a data set where you can basically ask the questions you need to ask to get insight from your detection engineering program, from your intelligence program, so that you're able to kind of, regardless of what question you have, you can get the answer out. So if I want to understand, like as I mentioned before, for this tactic, what type of threats is that related to? Or if I want to have a detection perspective, what type of products cover some for is this detection dependent on? And by that again, as an example, that product, which data does that require to kind of make this detection work? And how long does it work? Like to make the example as well with a lot of these XDR platforms, a lot of them are plug and play, but a lot of them also provide a different set of data retention based on the verbosity of the data, which is super, super difficult for customers to manage themselves. And this is something I kind of also laugh about sometimes as well, that if you don't have that type of insight, a lot of vendors, a lot of security operations platforms or security operation teams, they will just fall into this, just send me over the data just in case something happens. And that is super costly. And that is also something threat actors, if they were to compromise as well, would also love. I came across this picture once. I really kind of laughed about this being a byproduct of not having this fine-grained insight. Ultimately, one of the messaging I want to say about this is that I made the example earlier about, like, I think it's more impressive when I hear a vendor say, I have 100 alerts that are customer specific for you as a customer, or that's specific to you, and those 100 alerts, we're confident that if those trigger, they are going to generate alerts, because ultimately we decide the level of noise. I've seen a lot of automations being deployed to handle as a measure of scaling the concept of analysis response, but it's more of a band-aid of fixing bad alerts. And it kind of goes back to it's better to fix the system or the symptoms rather than keep bragging about having thousands of alerts, which kind of leads to that doesn't really perform well. And that's kind of on to the next point I'm trying to make as well, in terms of taking ownership of the noise, in terms of how one works in a security operations center and at the MDR provider, as this is the context of it. Having this type of when an analyst gets an alert, I think it's very important that an analyst looks at this type of insight next to the alert, understanding that this alert has triggered 100 times before me prior. Of those 100 times, 90% or 90 occurrences were false positives. 3 of them were false negatives, which mean I'm not going to go into full detail of it, but the case is that this will, when an analyst sees that type of insight, it will kind of foster a different type of behavior, a different type of structure in the security operations center in terms of not only handling the alert and going on to the next, but adopting more of an engineering based approach to it. And the ones are going to do this type of initiatives well are going to also be able to scale their operations to a larger extent. And this is kind of where I think adopting an engineering-based approach for scale is very much important. Like in terms of refining SOC structures, most SOCs and MDR vendors are structured around tiers. And I think like that doesn't really scale well because you have to move context from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3 to other specific departments, and that isn't really scalable. And as you've seen, kind of the world around security monitoring, detection and response have evolved around like in terms of SRE, DevOps, and that type of stuff over time. And I've seen a lot of like efficiency gains around that. I think that needs to hit the SOC as well. Building thing as code, you build it, you own it, you see it, you fix it. As the example I had on my earlier slide, if you see that type of bad performing detections, if you see that, you should fix it right there and then instead of escalating that to a tier 2 or tier 3 as well as an example. Try to speed up. I'm a little about on time, but as an example of the point I'm trying to make, I'm sure most of you guys have worked with or have had some type of relationship with threat intelligence. And this is kind of a running, I guess, at least from my perspective, a running joke is that the input you get from the threat intelligence are most likely some type of blog, some type of write-up that isn't really usable when writing a detection rule, unless you kind of re-ingest the whole context yourself, and try to apply it where you need it. And this is kind of where let's say a type of detection as code approach where you kind of this is a screenshot from a tool called OpenTide, which is a detection as code framework that kind of tries to address the whole concept of adding to intelligence to the right operational level in order to scale. And that means that, as you see in this screenshot, the whole idea here is that the detection engineers, the threat intelligence analysts, the DevOps team are supposed to meet in one in at the same workbench, which is the IDE or Visual Studio Code in this place, where the threat intelligence team they are the ones are responsible for not only making a blog or making a report, advisory or whatnot, but actually documenting detection models, threat vectors, and also enforcing a schema so that it can further be used when creating a detection rule. This is an example of where I'm in this tool or in this framework, I'm writing a detection rules, and I'm able to hover over the concept of a detection model, and in the IDE be able to access the actual kind of the juice of what I'm trying to get from the threat intelligence report as well. The screenshots doesn't give you justice, but this also is an example of of operationalizing threat intelligence at the right operational level. I think this is super important for scale and for being able to deliver on that type of context that I talked about. So lastly, I have some words about AI, and I'll have to do that quickly. In terms of what about AI? It's very, I think I typically say that I guess as in the security industry, we do love to be a bit up on the stands, trying to watch and see how things plays out before kind of diving into something. And I think that's going to be. This is just me thinking out loud, but I do think that MDR vendors will benefit from not taking that type of position. It's for the ones that work in tech, I strongly believe that this is quite transformative. It's very interesting to see the whole startup ecosystem around AI SOC and agentic SOC platforms. The fact that we are already on 130 plus startups, I think this is the number out of the that came out. I think most of them are in the US, but it's just to see the level or the amount of capital that goes into this problem is quite unprecedented. And also interesting, I've been playing around with this as well, and I've tried to look into some of the things that we're seeing in terms of specific AI specific things such as MCP, which might also be a key enabler for kind of furthering, kind of opening up for that distributed model that I was talking about earlier. And it kind of also shows great promise. But the key point I want to make that AI and these type of AI SOC plays are going to have a significant impact for MDR vendors. And it's going to be just if you look into, this is a picture I took from an individual called Francis Odom, which is an analyst in this space. There's a lot of software as a service models, AI SOC platforms that tries to now not only further make a squeeze on the value proposal that is of being able to detect threats, but also going further to the right in the attack cycle in terms of being able to automatically analyze and sometimes also respond, and their ability to do so well over time is going to be interesting to see how actually develops. I strongly believe that we will see some type of I call it an AI squeeze, that you'll see where you already basically see vendors that have dived into this space are seeing great efficiency gains in their own operations, where they can kind of choose to take out more profit based on that efficiency gain. But I do think that's very temporary. That efficiency gain, like customers themselves, other type of MDR vendors, when this stabilizes and this becomes a commodity, I strongly believe that more of that attack cycle to going from left to right, as I showed earlier in the slide, will be covered by technology that is trivially available to customers that will again further put a pressure on contextualized customer-specific deliverables at scale. And that was a mouthful, but I strongly believe that that's going to be the way going forward. So, what did we talk about today? This is kind of the things I touched upon, but the four main things I want you to kind of sit back with, which that I think is going to be important for MDR going forward, is scaling detection engineering, specific detection engineering, enabling a distributed delivery model, being able to do more when it comes to the analysis part in terms of scaling analysis and response, and lastly, adopting more of engineering structures. And this is somewhat of a teaser. I am coming up with part 2 and quite soon, and part 3 of this blog series that is going to dive more into kind of how to do those or how to suggest doing some of these things. I'm opening up for questions with 5 minutes left.
There is one question in the chat at least. It's from Eva. Do you mean that cybersecurity companies are skeptical about AI? I think it was the phrase you just mentioned.
Yes. This is just my personal perspective, but generally speaking, yes, I would say so. And that is and this is I'm saying that like is a binary statement. It's not necessarily everyone is, but like the perspective seen generally from the industry, especially from the vendors themselves, is skepticism. Whereas practitioners, the ones that are positioned to greatly benefit from this being a success, are typically not. And I do see this as something that will benefit both the vendors, the MDR vendors, the technology vendors, and the customers themselves. My personal perspective that the kind of the world that we are sitting in now is is not a great solution, so to speak, and that needs to change.
Yep. And seems like Jamal have your raised hand. Do you want to take it on chat or just open your mic if you want?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It's a very interesting presentation, giving insights on MDR. I really like it. I also work in the MDR space, so everything what you're saying about coverage is very important, because if you contract an MDR party, one of the most important things is, are they effective in detecting and can they respond effectively? But what's the role of quality assurance and certification? Because if you go to, let's say, the grocery store, all kinds of products in the EU are certified and healthy to be in the grocery store. But in cybersecurity, especially in the related to incident response and SOC, we're not that far. So, what's your perspective on that?
If I understand your question, like in terms of certifying this type of delivery, are you talking about certifying this type of a delivery, making sure there are standardized ways of defining the industry?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, because uh,
Yes.
let's say if you implement Sentinel or get an MDR solution provider delivering that kind of service, you still don't have any assurance that they are able to detect certain types of threats. You really need to
Yes.
do a mapping with MITRE attack framework, of that kind of thing. So, especially if you have companies that don't have that expertise in house, it's very difficult for them to select the right MDR provider.
Yes. I think that's a great question, and I think that's one of the big challenges with the industry as a whole. Like there was, as I mentioned at the very start of the presentation, there was this natural shift from calling it SOC as a service to MDR, managed detection and response. But with that shift, there was no clear definition of what that actually meant. If you look at Gartner reports today, there's Gartner, which is kind of renowned in this space in terms of making these definition of what is what. They haven't also come out and say that this is very loosely defined, and that is a significant issue for the end consumer, which is the customer here. It's not a feasible way going forward, in my perspective. When if something stabilizes as a service, such as or naming of a service such as MDR, I think my personal perspective, what will be beneficial for customers and vendors themselves, is that certain type of capabilities you have to deliver, and you have to document how you do it. Uh, and those are kind of non-negotiables. I think that would make things easier, so that so you're not left up in a position where you are buying MDR service, but the vendor doesn't do response, as an example. And or they say do manage detection, but they don't really manage detection. They give you a set of detections that you are left alone with. That's managed, right? So those type of things, if that is a certification, if that's a standard, I think that would be very beneficial for industry.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. Yeah, thank you.
Seems like that's it, and I guess we should thank you for a really good presentation, and thank you for having it, and we will ping you with the recordings to get an acceptance from you before we do it on YouTube. So thank you, and
Awesome.
we post the next event on the meetups. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, Migjen. Have a great day.
Thank you, Migjen.